Hello. Well, I've watched Danny Tommo's interview with the father of a grooming gang victim called Amy, and I've actually watched it twice. Um, and I'll just give you my initial thoughts about this. Firstly, I want to say to Amy, if you are watching this, if you ever watch this, I want you to know one thing. And that is that you are very brave, courageous even, to want to come forward and tell your story, give yourself a voice. There are ears that are listening to you, and there are people who care about you and what happens to you and your family. That you should know that, and never forget that. Okay. Now, the father of Amy was obviously upset. You could hear it in his voice, which wavered a lot. He was also nervous. I think that this man is traumatized by the events that have happened to his daughter. And we also have Danny Tommo, this is not a criticism of him, but who is not a trained investigator and is not a trained interviewer. But having said that, I think he did very well. This isn't about Danny Tommo, this is about the case in point, Amy's case. Now, I've made a few notes while watching the videos, which were on Telegram, because Danny had problems uploading to YouTube. Now, the father says at the start of the interview that Amy went missing, and that he was told by the police that nothing could be done for 24 hours, which is not correct. At the time, I believe Amy was 13 years old, if she wasn't 12. Now, I'll leave links to documents that you can look at as to how the police should respond to these what do you call them? Missing people and rape allegations. As far as a missing child is concerned, from what the father says in the interview, the police have failed to assess Amy as high risk due to her age. Now, there are assessments that police have to follow and look at. They have to assess the missing person. And there are a number of questions that are asked about the missing person in this assessment scheme. If the police officer at the scene, the initial police officer, can answer yes to any of those questions, then that missing person should be prioritised as high risk. And age is one of those high risk points. Now, Amy was 12 or 13 years old, ergo she is high risk. So there was a failure in the risk identification and a failure in the priority assessment of Amy as a missing person. That's the first point. Second point goes on to the physical examination of Amy, which I'll get a little bit into. The rape investigation procedure is very complicated. It's very long-winded. It takes a long time to go through. I know personally because I was a rape trained officer when I was a police officer. Now, I think I've gone through this before in another video, but if somebody rings to the police station and makes a complaint of rape, that caller will be assigned a designated officer. The designated officer shall be a rape trained officer who has gone through several courses to train in how to gather evidence, whether that be verbal evidence or physical evidence, including DNA evidence, how to get the doctor out, and what procedures have to be met with reference to DNA and physical evidence, i.e. underwear and that sort of thing. So it's a bit difficult when I don't have the full facts, but I would like to know if Amy received a dedicated officer, i.e. a rape officer, because the dedicated officer, the rape officer, is responsible for the investigation and securing of all evidence relating to that allegation of rape, and is responsible for the investigation up the process up to it being handed over to the Crown Prosecution Service, who then decide whether to go ahead with that case or not, whether there is sufficient evidence to prosecute the suspect. Now, I got a little bit confused over what the father was saying about the two men in the flat, and I would like to know whether Amy could identify the two men in that flat. Did she know them at the time of the offence? Were they previously known to Amy? Because what the father said was the DNA taken from Amy in the examination was not the DNA evidence of the guy in the flat. But he said there were two men. So what happened there? Because if Amy could identify the second man, he should have been arrested on suspicion of rape, and his DNA should be taken and checked against the DNA taken from Amy. Now, the next thing relating to that is the father said that Amy was pregnant at 12 years old or 13 years old, about that time. Was that rape which resulted in the pregnancy reported? And if so, what happened to that investigation? And if that's the case, why then wasn't Amy seen as a high risk child? There's a lot of questions there, I know. The fact that a child of 13 cannot consent to sex is correct. The age of consent in the UK is 16 years of age, with specific legal protection for children aged 12 and under, which carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment for rape, assault by penetration, and causing or inciting a child to engage in sexual activity. And that's the Sexual Offences Act 2003. It's difficult to talk about the involvement of the social services and the care services in Amy's case because I don't have the file in front of me. I don't know what has gone on in relation to the social services. I don't know what's gone on beforehand in Amy's life or Amy's family's life. But it seems odd to me that the social services can issue something called a behaviour contract to a 12 or 13-year-old girl when she was the one that was raped by adult men. I have 1,000 questions in my head right now. Frustrating because I don't have either the father or Amy to speak to. Frustrating because I'd love to have my hands on that file that the father had with all of his evidence. I'd love to have a look at that. The last thing I'd like to say about this was one of the last comments from the father, who talked about the detective, John Marsden, who claimed that he owned the case. Well, that seems to me a pretty strange thing for a police officer to say, that he owns that case. He might be the chief investigating officer of that case, but he certainly doesn't own it. I think he needs to be reminded that he is a public servant paid by the public to protect people like Amy. So I do believe that Danny Tommo is going to speak to Amy, and I look forward to hearing what she has to say. Again, I think that she's a brave woman now. She's an adult now, and I think it's important that we listen to these people, hear what they've got to say, and yeah, let's hope that we can get some justice for Amy. So with that said, I will wish you a very nice evening, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.